Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. I'm back in Israel again to record this show. We have a great guest today. I'm going to be meeting with my friend, Brigadier General retired Amir Avivi, who founded an incredibly important organization called the IDF, which is an organization of retired generals and senior leaders and war fighters from the IDF who've come together to try to advance the national security agenda and Zionism, both through as a movement, a social movement, and also as a think tank. So we're going to be talking to him in a bit about what's happening today in the IDF, around the IDF. But I wanted to start talking a little bit about what's going on today in Israel by telling you a story. I think it was Friday of last week. A very popular rock star in Israel named Shlomo Artzi called for national dialogue between the left and the right to sit down and try to iron out differences peacefully and cordially. Shlomo Artzi won the Israel Prize. He lit one of the torches in Israel's Independence Day celebration, I think last year. So he's a national icon. He's an old rocker, and very well beloved by a lot of people all over the country. So he was calling for everybody to bury the hatchet, particularly on the left, and sit down and come together. And he was immediately attacked by all of these leftist leaders and icons. And one of the people who spoke against him was Yariv Oppenheimer, the former head of Peace Now. And he said that, he called for a boycott of Shlomo Artzi's albums and his music, and for him not to be invited to play anywhere in the Israeli entertainment sector, which is very heavily controlled by the left and other places. So Shlomo Artzi calls for cordial, respectful dialogue between the disparate parts of Israeli society who are on either sides of the fence on judicial reform. And he was attacked, and there were calls for a boycott of his work and of himself by the left. And we've had the same thing happen to essentially everybody on the left, including the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, who calls for dialogue between the two sides, between the government and the Knesset on the one hand and the left on the other hand, over the issue of judicial reform. And they're being subjected to protests, calls for boycott. There was a big protest outside of Herzog's personal residence in Tel Aviv last week, and protests outside of the president's residence in Jerusalem. So everybody on the left who tries to stick his neck out even a little bit and call for discourses is immediately beset by this by this mob led by leftist political activists like Yariv Oppenheimer and others who call for their heads. And I think it's really instructive when you look at the disparity between the Israeli right today, and I would say the right in the United States, the Republicans in the United States, and the left here, and to an increasing degree also in the Democratic Party, where you see among the factions on the right in Israel, you have a wide disparity of views, of outlooks, of lifestyles. You have ultra-Orthodox and religious Zionists, and you have secular Zionists, and you have security hawks, and you have social conservatives, and you have social liberals, you have socialists, and you have capitalists, free market capitalists, and you have populists, you have economic populists. I mean, you have everything from everywhere. You have people who are, like I said, social conservatives, and you have people who are libertarian, and they all fit under this very large, rancorous, loud, noisy tent of the political right in Israel, and everybody has a place, and they're able to work together. So it's funny when people call this government the most far-right party. It's actually the most diverse government that we've seen in Israel. You really do have people represented from all walks of life in Israel, and their main common denominator is that they all want, that they're all very pro-Israel or Zionists. You could say the ultra-Orthodox aren't Zionists, but I don't think that that's even true. They might not call themselves Zionists, but they're very, very nationalist and pro-Israel. So I think, that's patriotism is the thing that combines them all together and makes it all possible that despite their disparity of views about how they want to live their own life, they're able to come together over something bigger, which is the life of this country. And on the other hand, on the left, you see with this outcry against Shlomo Artzi on Friday and what they've done to the president and what they did to members of Yesh Atid who just had the audacity to smile at Netanyahu and to look at him, to ogle at him actually with admiration at the Knesset in a picture that went viral about 2 weeks ago. That the left will not brook any non-uniform position by anybody. If you express even the slightest bit of sympathy for the right, if you are willing not to hate Netanyahu completely or hope that his wife is killed at a beauty parlor in Tel Aviv where you had thousands of leftists in a mob threatening her, not letting her leave a beauty parlor where she went to get her hair cut last week, and then blaming her, how dare she go and get her haircut in Tel Aviv at the height of their protests, like she staged the whole thing, she planned her beauty parlor appointment for the day of the protest. I mean, you see this rabble, this mob that's frothing at the mouth with hatred, and then when you see any expressions that go against that hatred, that go against that absolute rejection of any kind of dialogue with the right, any kind of acceptance of the legitimacy of the right, then they're immediately chopped down, they're immediately attacked, they find demonstrators outside of their house telling them that they're terrible people. And you see the same thing very much on the left in the United States. You see the same ideological rigidity and uniformity and on college campuses, and increasingly in the Democrat Party, dissenting voices are attacked. And the woker a population becomes, more radical a population becomes, the less democratic they are, the less willing they are to brook any compromise, to give any room for disparate views, not only not just in the country, which of course they won't. The cancel culture in the United States and here is very, very powerful, but even dissent within their own ranks, even disagreement, there's no room for disagreement. It's not for nothing that Benny Gantz, who's kind of a squishy center on the left, he cannot break ranks. He's too scared to break ranks because he's afraid that his head is going to get chopped off by the people in his camp if he does. Because the prices that they're exacting from people for not accepting the dictates of the most radical voices on the left is too high. At least now it is. I think they'll cross a Rubicon and we'll get to a point where it makes more sense, or the price is lower to break ranks. But right now, that's not what we're seeing. And we're not seeing it in the United States as well. And my friend Lee Smith, who's been on this show, he wrote an article over the weekend in Tablet magazine, and you should look at it, which is called Biden Sets Israel on Fire. And Lee makes a very large claim that the Biden administration is behind what's happening on the streets in Israel. And it's very clear that the Biden administration is openly supporting the left in their efforts to block the right, block the government, block the Knesset from doing what they pledged to voters that they would do, which is to place minimal restraints on the judiciary in Israel as part of a wider process of legal reform to put democratic checks and balances on the power of our legal fraternity. And you see Biden, Kamala Harris, Secretary Blinken, National Security Advisor Sullivan, and most outspokenly Tom Nides, the ambassador here, all putting their thumb on the scales on behalf of the left against the government. They've been, for the past 3 years, they've been funding the movement for quality government. I wrote about it a couple of weeks ago at JNS, and this is the movement that is at the heart of this mob chaos that's plaguing Israel, that's trying to set Israelis one against the other. That every week there's another letter of the high-tech people, yoga instructors, the IDF commanders in reserves, which we'll talk about with Amir Avivi in just a bit. But you see that this is a very, very well-funded organization with millions and millions and millions of dollars behind them. And Tom Nides, amazingly, he said that the Israeli people want the United States to interfere in their domestic politics. So no, that's absolutely not true. The Israeli people do not want that kind of interference by foreign powers in what's happening here in domestic political debates about the checks and balances in our democracy. There's nothing that's more of an internal matter than that. And yet the ambassador is almost peripatetic in his interference. Over the weekend, he viciously attacked, along with Ned Price, the State Department spokesman, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, for saying that the town of Hawara, the terrorist town of Hawara, where 2 Israeli brothers were executed last week, Hallel and Yagel Yaniv, at the Hawara Junction. And we've had, and I wrote about this week in my latest column in JNS, there were an average of 2 to 3 stoning and Molotov cocktail attacks against Israelis over the past month leading up to the murder of the Yaniv brothers. And Hawara is one of the most extreme cities. They had a fireworks display and a carnival to celebrate the massacre of 7 Jews in Neve Yaakov a few weeks ago, after synagogue services on Friday night. And Bezalel Smotrich himself had gone through the town just moments before the Yaniv brothers were killed. So he said in a moment of passion something really stupid, and instead of cutting him slack, Ned Price attacked him. Tom Nides continues to attack him. He said he wanted to throw him off an airplane, not let him come into the United States, which in and of itself is violent rhetoric. And all of this is part of an effort to really weaken Israel's democratic institutions, to strengthen the mob that seeks the overthrow of the government and the imposition of non-governmental, non-democratic restraints on the right of the democratically elected government and Knesset to govern and to legislate laws. And this is really a troubling phenomenon that we're seeing here, and we see it at a time when the United States, through Hadi Amar and others, is openly embracing the Palestinian narrative, which appropriates the Jewish narrative and our history of the land of Israel to themselves. They deny Jewish history, and they deny our rights to national self-determination in our homeland. And this is very openly now, with Hadi Amar as a special representative to the Palestinians, U.S. policy under the Biden administration, that they support Palestinians, including Palestinian terrorists, against Israel and against the people of Israel. I think we'll talk, Amir and I, about Iran and about what must be done, what could be done, what would be the potential of U.S. involvement in an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear installations, which now seems to be of the moment. But I think in order to get to a point where anybody would be even willing to think about doing something logical in relation to Iran or anything else, the left in the United States and the Biden administration, just like the left in Israel, has to break ranks. That is, that the embrace of irrationality on behalf of ideology is something that has to be abandoned in order to actually go somewhere good, whether it's the left acting like President Herzog and recognizing the legitimacy of the government, the legitimacy of democracy in Israel, and the democratic process, and then sitting down responsibly like adults and negotiating a compromise on judicial reform, or just allowing it to pass without their support. And so, too, when it comes to national security and to cooperation with Israel by Americans, by the left, you have to have people in the administration, whether from the Pentagon or from the White House or the State Department, who wake up from this ideological straitjacket or get themselves out of this ideological straitjacket and say, okay, wait a minute. What opportunities do we have? What are the threats that we have? How can we use our alliances, our alliance with Israel, our alliance with the Sunni Arab states to advance America's national interests? But I think everywhere you look on the left in the Western world, what you're seeing more and more of is ideological rigidity, is intellectual terror, social terror of leftists, lest they break ranks and accept the legitimacy of non-leftists, actors in their societies and in their governments. And I fear very much that if we don't see some sort of an awakening among a significant number of people on the left and a willingness on their part to accept democracy and embrace it, then things are going to be unpleasant in Israel. They're going to be unpleasant in the United States. They're going to be unpleasant in the Middle East and in the world. I again, I've been harping on it a lot. I also wrote about it in Newsweek last week. That what Herzog did, his intervention and calling for dialogue and accepting the principle that we need legal reform in Israel and accepting democracy as the basis for governing in Israel and legitimacy of election results, I think that that's really the starting point. And our salvation, such as it is from this very difficult time, both politically and strategically vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis the Palestinians, it's very much contingent on enough members of the left to follow Herzog's lead and not the lead of out-of-control leftists like Yariv Levin, and we're going to talk about with Amir Avivi in just a minute, former chiefs of staff of the IDF that are calling for civil war and insurrection. So those are my thoughts for now, and I think we should turn now to our discussion with Brigadier General Avivi. All right, well, I'm really happy today to have my very good friend, actually, and colleague, Brigadier General retired Amir Avivi. Amir, thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Carol.
It's really a pleasure. I've known Amir for, 18 years or something like that. And when was it you started the Israel Defense, what is it called again?
Defense and Security Forum.
Israel Defense and Security Forum several years ago. And tell us a little bit about what the forum does, and then we'll move into what I really want to talk about with you.
Yeah. Well, Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF, is both, I would say, a combination of a think tank and a movement. We deal with shaping Israel's national security challenges.
Who are you?
Yeah, mostly retired generals, commanders, officers, but also because it's a grassroots movement, we have many youngsters who are joining from high schools, from pre-army programs. So the way to really shape the understanding of the society about Israel's national security challenges from a very Zionistic point of view, you need to be a movement, a large movement. And we deal a lot with speaking to the young generation. We are very, very active on media and social media. And we also have a very strong research department that produces policy papers and research and surveys. We work with the government, with diplomats all around the world, Europe, the US. And we really push forward Israel's national security interests.
So, I mean, you were formed essentially because for many, many years, both you and I, and we talked about it over the years, were discouraged because there are so many politically active leftists who use their ranks as retired army officers to give legitimacy to leftist political positions.
Yeah, so the only organizations composed of former generals we saw for 30 years were guys that were joined together to push forward the peace plan. So they thought about a peace plan, and then they did reverse engineering. How do I fit Israel's security, values, and all of that into a specific peace plan? We are not experts in peace plan. We are experts in security. Mm-hmm. And we think that the way you should think is exactly the opposite. First of all, you need to know who you are. What is Zionism all about? What are Israel's and the Jewish people values and vision? And I think the most important question is what is needed for Israel to be secure for generations to come. If you understand what are the red lines, if you understand what is needed for us to exist, taking in account that we don't know what will be in the future, we don't know what the challenges will be. We need to make sure that any challenge in the future we can meet. And we can defend ourselves by ourselves. So if you understand what are these parameters, then you can talk about solutions, not the other way around. And this is what we do. We shape the understanding of what is needed for Israel to exist, and then we bring ideas also for different solutions and visions that might be relevant for the future.
So, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you for a while on this show, and what I wanted to talk about with you specifically this week is that we have all of these former chiefs of staff, from Benny Gantz to Dan Chalutz, Bogi Ya'alon, and of course Ehud Barak. They're claiming that the government's legal reform is the greatest security challenge Israel faces, which is really, it's both insane, but it's also insidious, because what they're doing, Ehud Barak was on TV Friday evening, and he called for a military coup against the Netanyahu government. Dan Chalutz, who was the chief of staff in the failed effort of the Second Lebanon War, he compared Prime Minister Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler yesterday. And you just have all of these very senior military officials, retired, who are leading the charge and really coming out with the most violent rhetoric, I think, that we've been hearing. Even the mayor of Tel Aviv, he's a former brigadier general in the Air Force, and he called for violence. You have the former inspector general of the police, who are saying that commanders should obey the Supreme Court and not the government. And his words were repeated by the former head of the Shabak. So this, to me, is not only to me, it's very, very distressing. Add to that the fact that we have groups of reservists, including today came out 37 out of 40 pilots in an F-15I squadron said that they wouldn't report to reserve duties if the legal reforms go through. I mean, this is really, it seems like this is a mounting challenge to Israel's very national security by people like yourselves, who were career military officers and came out and became and are doing this. First of all, what do you make of all of this, of the leading role that is being played by generals?
When I established IDSF, one of the things we talked about, the generals that established the organization, is that we are experts in security. We're not experts in legal reforms or in other political issues, and therefore, as an organization, we don't have any opinion on the reform. But, and I probably, by the way, if this discussion would have gone in a democratic, normal way, probably we wouldn't speak about it at all.
Right.
But what is happening now is that basically all the fight against the reform is not really about the reform, okay? Because many of these people that are fighting and saying that this is the end of democracy and this is going to be a dictatorship and all of that, there are people who by themselves suggested similar laws or supported this reform previously. So this is not about the reform. This is about shift of power. Shift of power from a small group, an elected group, to the people. Now, I don't know, as far as I remember, democracy is the governance of the people. And this reform is about bringing back the force to the people. But there are many people, when they look at these people, and they see...
When they look at the Israeli people.
Yeah, they see these strange guys with kippas and, religious Zionists, and even stranger guys that are Haredim, the Orthodox. And they see all these guys who came from Morocco and all these places that live, not in Tel Aviv. They don't really want them to decide anything. And, it reminds me, I met with one of the most prominent generals in Israel. We were sitting with other two people in a coffee shop, and we were discussing different issues. And at a certain point, I told him, I think Am Israel, our people, the people of Israel, they're really smart as a people, And he looked at me shocked and disgusted, and he looks at me and he says, Am Israel asafsuf, they are a mob. They need to be managed. And I think this is the story. This is the story of people who truly believe, and they say it on television clearly, that the vast majority of the Israeli people are a mob that should be managed by a small, enlightened group of people. And we shouldn't give them the power. Now, I don't know. To me, it doesn't sound so democratic, this way of thinking, that the vast majority of the people are stupid, they are mob, they, shouldn't give them any decision-making. I don't think these people are really democratic when they say that. And this is why they're looking for other ways that are non-democratic to really manage policy and decision-making in Israel. Now, when you detest your own people, and in a way it makes you pretty much detest your own country, then when something doesn't go on the way you want, you're pretty much willing to do anything to stop it. And this is also, one of the terrible things that are happening, that they are bringing politics into our most sacred institution, the IDF, the Israeli Defense and Security Forces. I think that's terrible, because the IDF is the army of the people. And what makes it the army of the people is that when we join the army, whether it's in reserve or, a regular army, we leave the politics outside. We fight together. We die together. We defend each other. We are willing to risk our lives to save our friends, and we don't ask what are their political views. We don't care. We are the army of the people. And when you are willing to bring politics into the army, when you say, I don't like this political process, so you know what? I'm not doing military reserve. This is devastating.
How did it come to pass that 37 out of 40 pilots in a reserve F-15I squadron, which is a backbone of Israel's strategic capabilities, would say this? I mean, it seems like, we all are, I joined, I was one of the first members in your organization, right? As a retired captain in the
Right.
Israeli army. But, this is a people's army. I dreamed as a girl in the United States of serving in the IDF. Lots of people did. Ilan Galnelis, the American Israeli who was murdered last week in a terrorist attack, he came to Israel and he served as a lone soldier, and then he went back to America and he went to Columbia University, where I had gone before I came to Israel. And so, there are people coming from all over the world who want to be part of this army. But then you look and you see the top level of leadership in the IDF seems to really hate the country. They seem to hate the people. They seem to hate their soldiers. How did this happen? I mean, how do you explain this?
I think that there are several explanations, specifically about what's going on now. First, you see, these leading politicians and big part of the media, again and again and again, saying that this is the end of democracy. That bringing the force to the people is non-democratic.
Right.
And people are affected by that. Some people really, without going into details about the reform, they actually buy this. That this is the end of democracy, that this is a dictatorship. And supposedly, if it's true, and somebody is, undermining Israel's democracy, that sounds pretty extreme. So people say, we should do extreme things.
But to steal a tank from a war memorial in Tel Saki because somebody told you that it's the end of democracy? What, are they stupid?
It's crazy. And the other thing that we in IDSF talk about a lot, and we deal with this also on the education level, there is no Zionism today in the education system. So basically, the young generation is not brought up in a way that they feel that that's a part of something big. So the reason why many of them go to the army, to the top units, it's not because of the people of Israel. It's not because of the land of Israel. It's because of personal achievement. They want to show that they can be the top. Some of them, by the way, go to pilot's course and say, if I don't succeed in pilot course, I'm not serving, or I'm not, what kind of values are these? And we need to change our education.
Yeah, we had Roni Sass over here a couple of weeks ago to talk about the woke penetration of our school system. So you feel that it's the same thing going on in the schools vis-a-vis military
Yeah,
service?
but even before the issues of progressive messages and things like that, it's about patriotism. It's about the fact that it was very clear 30, 40 years ago that we need to build a nation here. We need to build a society of people who care about each other, and not just tell them to excel in math or in English, or so they can be good or excel in high tech, right? And this is lacking. And when this is lacking and it meets with situations like that, then people get confused. They forget that they serve the people. And this is above politics.
Yeah,
This
but
is
we've
above all
seen
these
politics
discussions.
in the military before. I mean, it is in fact very anti-democratic. We saw that the first effort by high-level officers like Eli Geva and others to refuse to serve came with the first war that was led by the Likud government in Lebanon in 1981. So, this seems to be a pattern that repeats itself, right? And then we saw it in the wars with the Palestinian terrorism over the years.
Yeah, and it always comes from the same part of the society. I said in the television several times that we, as a big group, had our challenge 2 years ago when they established a new government. That was a government that basically gave the keys of the country to the Muslim Brotherhood. For us, and people can discuss, you are right, you're not, but I'm telling us how we felt. We felt more terrible than any guy now about the reform. It was devastating for us. We saw the end of Zionism, which, by the way, is more important even than democracy. Having a Jewish state is more important. We didn't even imagine a situation where we'll say, we'll take our money out of the country, or we won't serve, or use the units and say that, we're against, and our unit is against, or things like that. It's not in our lexicon. It doesn't exist. We don't think like that because we care about the people. So we were angry, and we talked about it in the media, in social media, and we wrote letters, and we did everything that somebody can do within the borders of democracy. But we would never, ever endanger our state or the army,
How big of a threat do you think that what we're seeing now is? I mean, initially, I had looked at this with Chalutz and with Barak and Bogi Ya'alon and Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot and others. I mean, sort of speaking about it in a lesser degree, but also using their rank as a means to push a political agenda. And I thought, well, if you go up to the level of division commander, essentially, they don't have soldiers in this fight. And so it's not a big deal, let them try it. They want to call for a military coup with what army, But then when all of these reserve units started signing these letters, these collective letters saying that they were going to refuse to serve, if the Knesset passes laws legally based on the promises that the parties in the coalition made to voters that they were not going to serve in the army anymore, I mean, then I just start to wonder how concerned are we supposed to be about this phenomenon, and how do you think it should be dealt with?
I think it's concerning. By the way, on my way here, I spoke to one of the leading generals in the army. They feel that things are more under control than what it seems in the media. But it is concerning. But I also think that it's going to backfire on them. I think
on
that
who is them? On these leftists?
all of these people who are leading this disaster, it's going to backfire back. Because the vast majority of the Israeli society and also of the commanders are not willing for anybody to endanger the Israeli Defense Forces. And I think they're doing a very big mistake in the way they are managing themselves. They have climbed a very high tree. And I think that sooner or later they have to, climb down, because this is not something that will be acceptable for a long time. And I think that the government, shouldn't agree with this bullying. I mean, we're a democracy. At the end of the day, I think the president said it in the clearest way. He said, first of all, a reform is needed. We need a reform. Then he said there is an elected government, and the elected government has the right to push policies. This is what they were elected for, even if these policies are harsh, you know. We were not happy about Oslo. We were not happy about the disengagement. We were not happy about the gas deal, giving to Hezbollah all this gas for nothing. But, you know, governments, they push policies, whether you like them or not. Governments decide to go to wars. Some of them rightly so, and some not. People get killed, you know, for government decisions. Governments decide about peace. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's terrible. So, yeah, that's government. Government needs to push policies. And the president also said the Knesset, that the legislature, you know, they're the sovereign entity of the people of Israel. And the place where these things should be discussed is the Knesset. And I expect, you know, our politicians to talk and discuss it, because let's see what are we talking about, you know. You look at this reform and you look at it into details, right? So in our law, for example, judges cannot review laws.
Right.
There is no judicial review in Israeli law.
Right.
But the judges decided that they can do it. And now the government says, you know what? Okay. We agree. We agree that you can do it, that it's right, but let's write what is the past. How do you do it? How many judges are needed to review a law?
Yeah, but the thing is that, I mean, we've gone over on this show many, many times the content and just how moderate the reform package really is. But I just need to go back for a second with you to the IDF. And so you feel that these generals, that they've just climbed up a tree that is just way too high, and that they're going to be discredited. I mean, I was in last week's show was actually a broadcast of a conversation that I had in Toronto with a historian and former newspaper publisher named Conrad Black, and he said, you know, maybe the proper thing would be to just let this pass. That, you know, things are going to reach a certain climax where, you know, Netanyahu is going to be able to come in like de Gaulle did in 1968 and just say, enough is enough, we're not going to have this anymore, and clamp down. But one of the things that de Gaulle had in 1968, and that really the military thing here is so key in understanding, is that, you know, de Gaulle, France in 1968 was on fire. You know, there not only were the students on strike, but then all of the labor unions went on strike, and everything was shut down in France. And everybody was thinking that there were going to be new elections and they were going to topple the government. And what de Gaulle had in 1968 was the military. So he went to West Germany. He met with the man who had been the general in charge of French forces in Algeria, who he had betrayed. But this guy was loyal to de Gaulle all the same. And he went to him, and the guy said, if you need us, we'll be there for you. And, you know, there's a real question whether that's the case with the IDF. If Netanyahu says, will they follow the government? I mean, Barak is calling for them, and all of these other generals are calling for them to enact a military coup or to obey the Supreme Court and not the government, even though, you know, the law is explicit, obviously, that they're subordinate. So, you know, my feeling was, well, that would be too high of a risk, because what do you think of the status of the general staff?
I think that the values in the army are really clear. They get orders only from the government and from the Ministry of Defense. We just, by the way, updated the list of values of the army. And the new value they put in Hebrew it's called mamlachtiyut. I don't know how to say it in English.
The stateliness.
Is that you are loyal to the state, to the government, meaning to the legislature and the government, to the law and the government. I think there's no question about that. And I think that the guys like, you know, Chalutz and others that are pushing things through the reserve and the army, they know that this is something that hurts. They are playing a dangerous game. But they don't really, control what's going on in the army, and the army will abide to the government. And remember that 70%, 80% of the army is people who support the government's policy. They cannot play around with that. With all due respect to a few dozens of all the reserve Air Force pilots or some guys in the special units. Not relevant. This is not the army. The army is the army of the people. And the people, most of them are not going to agree to something like that. So I think it's less dramatic.
What would you suggest that the government do under these circumstances? I mean, you said, this is terrorism. I mean, it's not terrorism like let me just finish. It's not terrorism like blowing up buildings, but it's terrorism in the sense that you're using threats of violence or destruction of institutions in order to coerce the government and the people to do something that they don't want to do. So in that sense, it is political terror. But how do you? What would you do? What would you advise Netanyahu and Gallant to do, given what these former generals are saying?
Well, first of all, talking about Gallant, he's Minister of Defense. He needs to make sure, together with the Chief of Staff and the generals, that there is a very clear red line. People who say we are not going to come to reserve should be punished or kicked out. I mean, we are not playing games here. You cannot use the army for political... I mean, if it was the other way around, and it was the right-wingers who say now we are not going to serve, they would have been in jail a long time ago. And I think that the red line should be crossed, very clear. It should be clear for everybody.
Well, I mean, I said yesterday, but I don't see any indication of this happening. I said yesterday on TV that I think, that Netanyahu and Gallant should convene the general staff of the IDF and read them the law and say, does anybody here have a problem with obeying this? And if so, here's the door, leave.
Yeah. But I don't think that...
You don't think that there's any reason...
I don't think there is an issue. I don't think there is
then
one general in the army.
Why hasn't Herzi Halevi come out and said something very clear? Why
this is something that
silent?
we're asking from day one. And we asked several times.
Herzi Halevi, in case you don't know, he's the chief of staff of the IDF. And he, by the way, he was appointed by Gantz after the government had already fallen, and in a way that I think was very anti-democratic. But it was very strange that Gantz insisted that his appointment had to go through, despite the fact that there were going to be elections before his predecessor, Aviv Kochavi, left his position. So Herzi Halevi from the outset was sort of tagged by a lot of people in this country as a political general, that he belonged to a party.
I don't think he's a political general. I think he's a very good general and chief of staff. Herzi doesn't like media, okay? He doesn't feel comfortable to speak on media. This is why he chose to say what he has to say in the officers' school a few days ago.
He didn't say something very clear, though.
Yeah, he said, but I think the messaging must be much stronger. The army at the moment, I'm speaking to them, almost on an everyday basis to see what's going on and also how we can assist. They are doing a lot of work inside the army itself, with the Air Force, with the intelligence and so on. They prefer to do the work inside than say big things on the outside. This is his choice. I would have done things differently. I think he should have spoken on TV and say very, very clear things. If he would have done that day one, probably wouldn't be in this situation now. I think that also he feels uncomfortable because he's dealing with ex-chief of staffs like Barak or Bogi or Chalutz. Some of them even were ministers of defense, and one of them was even a prime minister. It's hard. He was, their subordinate for many years as a young officer. And attacking them, I think for him, it's hard. It's hard, even if it's devastating what they're doing. So he prefers to deal with it inside the army and not, say...
I think he's making a mistake, if I may be so bold as to say. I mean, because the attacks on the army, the demands for the army to become a political arm of the left are being made in public. So it would, and towards the public, the target audience here is twofold, or threefold. It's the government that they're trying to terrify into submission. It's the public that's watching them on TV. And then it's the reservists as well. But I mean, they're making a public campaign to undermine public.
Yeah, I agree, Karen, and I think that this is why we're trying to help the army. And I must say that one of the good things that is happening, and we'll see it in the coming weeks, is that generals from all over the political spectrum, left, center of right, are joining together, saying that's it. We're not willing to bring politics into the Israeli Defense Forces. And I think this voice is going to be stronger and stronger within the coming weeks. And we're just now starting to see the reaction to this really irresponsible process that we're seeing here.
All right, well, I hope so, because we have a lot of challenges that we're facing. And I want to talk about one in particular, but if we have a little bit of time, I might want to talk about a second one. And the first one that I want to talk about now really is Iran. And then if we have time, I also want to talk a little bit about what's happening with the Palestinians. But insofar as Iran is concerned, I mean, the people who, first of all, Colin Powell, number 3 in the Pentagon, said, I think he said fairly outrightly, and so did the director of the CIA, that Iran should be viewed as a state that's already reached breakout capability. I mean, they're saying, it'll take 12 days for them to become for them to reach. This is a joke, it's like they're making fun of our intelligence by saying, well, they're 12 days away from nuclear weapons. No, they are now a breakout. They've reached the breakout point and past it. They can independently develop nuclear weapons at will. That's the American position now. So how do you look at this situation?
I think we are witnessing a huge change globally in the last year due to the Russian-Ukrainian war. The West, rightly so, imposed very harsh sanctions on Russia. But one of the results of these sanctions is that we see the East getting closer and closer together. Right. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. The East economically is huge when you take into account also India.
And Brazil.
And it's basically managing to pretty much build their own ecosystem and bypass the sanctions. Now, when they see the West with zero willingness to use power, only sanctions, they are saying to themselves, okay, we're managing to bypass these sanctions. The West is not willing to use power. Now we can do anything we want. And this is destabilizing the whole globe. Now, the director of the CIA already said in December that we are witnessing a Russian-Iranian front that has emerged. This is a huge global change. Now, it's not only a Russian-Iranian front. It's a Russian-Iranian North Korean front backed up by the Chinese economy. The East is challenging the West, and it's going to challenge more and more, and the West is absent from this challenge.
Yeah, but the thing is that, I spoke about this with David Goldman a couple of weeks ago about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine that now has entered its second year. I mean, the United States never developed the industrial capacity to match its rhetoric with its capabilities. It's going to take, according to the Wall Street Journal, it'll take 13 years for the United States to restore the inventories that it's already expended in the last year in Ukraine. I mean, they don't have the production capability. They've emptied out, or at least seized, cannibalized their stores of weapons here in Israel to bring it to Ukraine, which are supposed to be essentially to be used not only for the United States, but also for Israel in time of war. So, I mean, we're, in a way, it's looking, and Europe doesn't have any capacity to arm Ukraine. So, let alone Taiwan. So, I mean, what can they do?
Really, because of that, I think that what we are suggesting to the U.S. is the right path. We are saying, listen, guys, you are challenged. You cannot take on Russia. You cannot take on China like they are trying to do now by starting to move to build big bases in the Philippines and challenge directly the Chinese, which is not a smart idea to do at all. especially with, the problems they have industrially and so on. And we're saying, listen, guys, you want to build deterrence? Pick up on the easiest target. That's
Right.
Iran. Okay?
Right.
Don't pick up. Now, let's see what happens if the U.S. decides to listen to our advice and build a coalition here in the Middle East with the huge capabilities of Israel, the huge capabilities of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. We are all very, very powerful and strong. It's not only the U.S. And we challenge the weak link. The weak link is Iran. This will affect everything. One, it will affect the Ukrainian war. The Russians cannot succeed without Iran. If you take on Iran, it will immediately affect what's happening in Ukraine.
Okay.
If you take on Iran, this will deter China from further expansion in the East, because they say, okay, these guys actually are willing to use power. So if they use power against Iran, or even not use, just pose a credible threat on Iran, this is a game changer. But there is also one other thing. Basically, the Middle East needs the U.S. to stand with us against the Iranians. And for that, the Saudis are saying we are willing to offer a huge peace agreement. Not only with us, we are the leaders of the Sunni world. So we are willing to offer a peace agreement with us, Pakistan, Indonesia, Oman. This is a global peace agreement that will create a huge alliance for the U.S., will bring to the White House a huge peace agreement. But it's not only about that. They are saying we're willing to dramatically expand the production of oil. This will take prices down. We're willing to open new route of commerce, which Biden talked about when he visited Israel. He did this Zoom with India, UAE, and Israel, talking about a new route of global trade. This is needed. It takes a month off instead of going through Egypt. This is all something that we have to offer the administration. And this is the cheaper and easiest way for them to build deterrence, get peace agreements, improve economy. This is one option. Let's see what is the alternative. The alternative that they continue to sit, on the fence, along the lines, not really doing anything and not challenging this Eastern challenge. The result will be, at the end of the day, that Israel will have to attack by its own. And if we do it by our own, this will destabilize the whole Middle East. This will bring a regional war with Hezbollah, with Hamas, Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq. And this will bring waves of, economic fall, recession to all the world. So the U.S. will find itself in a year or two in election with the Middle East completely destabilized, with oil prices rising, with the recession. And for what? Instead of stability, peace, deterrence, trade routes, and all of that. This is the choices. Now, when I talk about that, first of all, I must say that when I visited Washington last week, people were listening very, very carefully, because it's not a joke. This is two very different
options.
choices. It's and the opportunity is big, even politically speaking. It's a big opportunity for the administration. And the risk also is big. So they need to consider it very carefully, especially knowing that the Army, the Central Command, and the CIA already understand that. And the military in the U.S. is getting ready for a military option.
Well, that's the question, because I look at what's happening with CENTCOM and the integration of the IDF into Central Command, and we're having exercise after exercise with CENTCOM.
We did the biggest exercise ever.
Right.
Now.
And then Milley just was here over the weekend, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So on the one hand, you look at that and you say, something is changing here. But then on the other hand, Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, was just in Iran over the weekend, and the Iranians said, "Oh, okay, we're going to turn the cameras back on in our nuclear sites," and they said that they resolved the issue of the 3 nuclear sites that they hadn't given explanations for, and that the IAEA is going to be willing to close its investigation, which was one of the big sticking issues that was blocking the reinstatement of the 2015 nuclear deal with the Biden administration. So, and Rob Malley met with with one of the heads of Iraq, I think the foreign minister, and he's very clearly a proxy of Iran. And the Iranians then talked about that conversation that Malley had with the Iraqi foreign minister, so that there are indirect negotiations. I mean, they've always been indirect, still ongoing between the Biden administration and the Iranians, and the Biden administration have not walked back even 1 centimeter their clear desire to appease the Iranians, even at the price of a nuclear-armed Iran, so that their policy continues to be in March of 2023 what it was in January 2021 and what it was in 2015
Although they
and
all
16.
changed completely.
Completely. So
I mean,
that
the Iranians are clearly aligned with Russia.
and
They are
they're also a nuclear state. I mean, they already have breakout capacity for nuclear weapons. So you see that there's a continuation through Rob Malley of the same Obama-Iran policy. And then you look at what they're doing, with the Palestinians, that Hadi Amar was here last week, and he very clearly sided with Hamas and Fatah and the PLO against Israel across the board, whether it was in the Aqaba summit, or whether it was in Hawara, or whether it was in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. I mean, he exposed, essentially, I wrote about it in my last article in JNS, he exposed the full breadth of the realignment of the United States away from Israel and on behalf of Palestinian terrorists. So, I mean, you look at that, and then you look at Ambassador Nides, who's saying that the Israeli people want me to interfere with their domestic politics, threatening Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, saying he wants to throw him off the airplane.
He doesn't mean the right Israeli people.
Well,
so he doesn't know really what the Israeli people think.
But he's choosing, and they're funding the Movement for Quality Government, which is the central node in this whole effort to inflame Israel. So, I mean, you look and you see, at least outwardly, very clearly, the Biden political, the not maybe the Pentagon, although I don't know, but the Biden administration is realigning the United States towards Iran, towards the Palestinians, and most importantly, against Israel, against Israeli democracy, against the Israeli government. So, I mean, when you were in Washington presenting this to a lot of people, and they took it very seriously, but it's hard I hope that you succeeded.
Look,
but
I heard a lot of cynicism, especially in some think tanks we met, about what the Biden administration will or will not do. And we don't know what they will do. Maybe we are on our own. And maybe we have to do the job, and the result, everybody will feel that at the end of the day. But I still have some hope, because reality has changed to such an extent, and the administration has so much to lose and also so much to win if they do the right thing. I believe in realpolitik. I know that today we see trends that go beyond realpolitik to other, things that they take in account. But if they follow realpolitik, they will have to understand in a few months, maybe in half a year, that they need to build a coalition and really be willing to pose a credible threat, military threat on Iran. And this is the only way they can stabilize the world. If they won't do that, this will be devastating for the whole globe. And then they will have to deal with the Chinese. And they will have to deal with the more expansion of the Russians, because the Russians will understand that the West has lost completely the willingness to fight.
I mean, I think you're right. I think that, it's not just the willingness to fight, it's also the wherewithal. I mean, the United States, David Goldman, I saw he tweeted about this a couple of days ago, and he's right. He said that for the last 20-odd years, since 9/11, the United States has rebuilt the U.S. military to fight men in turbans in the Middle East that are fighting with fairly unsophisticated weapons, and they're ill-equipped both in terms of industrial capacity and also in terms of training and doctrine to fight conventional forces, to fight China. There was a study that came out from the Australian Academy of Sciences or something, which did a one-to-one comparison of Chinese and U.S. Capabilities, scientific capabilities in, I think it was 41 different areas, and China was ahead of the United States in 37 of them. So you have, the United States trained all of these Chinese engineers who then went back to China and outstripped the United States in terms of capabilities and knowledge. And so you look at these parameters, and everything that you say is so right, but then you look at what they did in Afghanistan, where they just got up and left, or what they're doing with China, that they're not expanding either their R&D.
But we have to, it's important for people.
I mean, they're not
to
acting
listen,
rationally.
to understand
Basically, what I'm trying to say is
what's the difference between Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran.
Okay.
I would say that probably both the Iraqi war and the Afghani war, easily you could say that were a mistake. Bringing boots on the ground for years and years, you see at the end of the day that it didn't help anything. We didn't get anything out of that. Iran is a different issue. Iran is one major air attack. That's it. We're not talking about boots on the ground. We're not talking about years and years of dealing with the population and all of that. It's not about that. It's about missiles and air force and going and in 2 hours destroying all the nuclear capabilities of Iran. And it's not that complicated for a coalition to do. It is challenging for Israel alone. We can do it, but it's very, very challenging. But if we can do it alone, certainly a coalition with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with the UAE, Bahrain, all these countries, one major attack, and that's it. That's it. We're getting rid of this huge global threat. Now, if the Iranians achieve nuclear weapons, the whole Middle East will be nuclear. The Saudis are already ready to buy nuclear capabilities from Pakistan.
Right.
Within a year or two, the whole Middle East will be nuclear. And these are not stable countries. I mean, these countries can fall any time to the hands of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a global danger. This is not a joke. This is not about Israel. Israel is probably the only country that can actually deal with these threats. Europe cannot deal with them. And certainly, the Africa and other countries in the Middle East.
When I was in Iraq, it was amazing to me. It's 20 years this month of the U.S. invasion, and I was an embedded reporter with the 3rd Infantry Division. That was the tip of the spear of the U.S. military invasion of Iraq. And ahead of the invasion, I asked the brigade commander, William Grimsley. I said, well, what preparations have you made for fighting terrorism? And he looked at me blankly. The same thing with the commander of the 5th Corps, which was responsible for that entire operation from Kuwait. They had made none, and they had no battlefield awareness of what they were going into whatsoever. I mean, absolutely, at least not in the 3rd Infantry Division, they didn't. And the results were not long in coming. I mean, and the thing is that I said to one of the officers who was with me in the battalion, I said, did you study Israel's experience in Lebanon? No. I said, because there's the closest example of what you're about to get into, this was before they even invaded, is what we experienced. I mean, from a demographic perspective, from the perspective of the relationship between what was happening there and what happened in Syria and Iran. And they didn't look. And I said, why didn't you look at it? And he said, oh, because you guys are the occupiers and we're the liberators. And so you
remind me something funny. At that time, it's not funny, but there were thousands of American soldiers killed along the roads in Iraq.
Right.
From IEDs.
The first ones who were killed were in the battalion I was embedded with.
So the U.S. decided to build this new organization to fight the problem of the IEDs.
Right.
And they built an organization called JADO, Joint Improvised Explosive Devices Destruction Organization. Only the U.S. can think about something like that. And they gave them some pocket money, $5 billion to start with, which is bigger, a bigger budget than all the IDF. And I was sent to a convention of this
'Cause you're
new
engineering corps.
organization. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time.
In the engineering corps.
Yeah, from combat engineers. And when I arrived to the convention, I thought I'm going to meet DOD, combat engineers, like me. But everybody was intelligence from all the different branches, CIA, FBI, Army, so on. And for 2 days, I listened to what they were talking about. And every single person that spoke said, we have to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. We as you say, we are the liberators. And when I came to speak as a young officer, lieutenant colonel, I said to him, listen, first of all, it's the hearts and minds of the American people you need to win, from our experience, because if you bring your soldiers in coffins, it's only a matter of time until they kick you out of Iraq. You need to make sure that you keep your soldiers safe. The other thing I said to them, listen, in the Iraqis' eyes, you are no more than crusaders contaminating the land of the Islam by your mere presence there. The moment you will turn your back, they will stab you. And when I stepped down, some guys that actually fought in Iraq, they came, they shook my hand, they say, you are right, that's exactly what's going on. And all these Washington guys, they were looking at me. One of them said to me, sir, thank you very much, but I respectfully disagree with you. I said to him, listen, this is my card. Talk to me in 3 years, let's see where you guys will be. We saw what happened later, ISIS and all of that. And basically, America has been kicked out of Iraq almost completely. So they don't understand the mentality. They don't understand what Islam is all about. They don't understand that any Christian that intervenes, no matter why, is an invader, it's a crusader, and is going to be hated by the society. This is the reality.
It is a reality, and now we have an additional reality, and I guess we'll just leave it with this, which is that you have a very radical ideology that's guiding so much of the leadership of the United States, which, the people who you talk to in Washington in the early 21st century, probably around 2005, 2006, I would assume, they're not the same people that are in the Pentagon today, and they're not the same people that are in the Democratic Party anyway today, and so the rigidity of the ideology is really something new. The unmalleability of the brain of somebody who has OD'd on woke vitamins is pretty amazing. Can I ask you just one last question? We're talking about Iran. So when you look at it seems to me that we have this working alliance. No peace doesn't really matter. We have a working alliance with a lot of the countries in the Gulf, and I would include Saudi Arabia in this. And it's just a hypothetical, the two of us talking. But if the United States doesn't want to get involved with Iran, if they want to appease Iran, if they maintain course, is there any reason to think that Israel wouldn't be able to just do it with the Saudis and the UAE?
We're witnessing the fact that the Israeli chief of staff has visited in the last few months every single Sunni country around us. The coordination is very, very strong. For us, for all of us, this issue is existential. So I think that definitely Israel is preparing for a possibility of dealing with this threat by its own. By the way, last week we approved the biggest budget ever for the IDF. And it was pretty amazing because for the first time in 75 years, the IDF put a number and no questions asked. It never happened, not even in the 50s when there were 7 countries surrounding us.
But we had a lot less money then.
Yeah, but there were fierce discussions. No questions asked. The IDF got everything they need to win. And I think the preparations are ongoing. Maybe everybody here is dealing with the judicial reform, but at the same time, the army is preparing for war. Because Iran is not only Iran. Iran, it's all these militias that are surrounding us. And we are preparing for all this challenge.
Yeah, we had 2,000 trucks of humanitarian relief going into Syria since the earthquake last month from Iran, which is I'm sure it's not weapons.
They're weaponizing
it's not blankets.
Hezbollah, they're weaponizing Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen, and the militias in Iraq, and it's ongoing, and it's a lot of UAVs. We saw how devastating these UAVs are in Ukraine. The Hezbollah has more than 2,000 UAVs that can cross the border any moment. They have missiles, they have rockets, mortars. So it's challenging. It's very, very challenging, and we need to prepare. And it's not going to take long, a year, 6 months, 2 months, I don't know how long. And as I said, if we attack alone, this will be devastating economically for the whole globe. This is what we're saying to the Europeans. This is what, by the way, we're saying to the Chinese and to the Russians.
So let me just ask you, okay, one last question. The last question I'll ask you is to go back to where we started from, with these retired chiefs of staff of the Army and major generals in the Army and brigadier generals of the Army who are calling for civil war, who are stirring up and inciting people to insanity, to not serve in the military and all the rest of it. And you said, and I think rightly, that one of the main, that they oppose democracy, and that one of the main forces that's propelling them to do these terrible things is hatred of the Israeli people, is this perverse sense of condescension, that they're better than everybody else, and that we're the mob, as the general told you. Do you think that they may wake up, that they may change their mind, or do you think that they just, they're never gonna see that they're swimming in hatred so deep that they'll never get their head out from under? And do you think that given this climate that people in Israel can feel comfortable about our military?
I'm a big believer in the people of Israel. And I believe that we're starting to see the reaction against this kind of behavior. The people of Israel cannot agree to see such behavior, endangering our economy, endangering our army, endangering the society. And for what? For judicial reform? The question of how we choose judges? Who cares? Really, it's not that serious. They do such a big fuss about it, but really for everyday life, for people, but the balance is exactly between the legislative to the government, to the judicial system. Okay, it's an issue, but it's not that dramatic the way they do it. When I studied for my bachelor's degree, I studied, among other things, American history.
Right.
And there was a very interesting course, the American history through the eyes of the Supreme Court, decisions of the American Supreme Court. And while I was studying that, we learned about letters of Thomas Jefferson, that he wrote many, many letters.
Sure did.
And he talked about judicial tyranny. He called the judiciary in the States, the Supreme Court, he said they are like sappers. I'm a sapper, right? A combat engineer. That are taking ground step by step in a non-alarming way. That's Thomas Jefferson, right? And I said that several times on TV, and I said, look, guys, the day democracy was created, these discussions began. And you can be supportive of a conservative judicial system. You can be the other way around, activist Supreme Court. But it's all within the borders of democracy. And this is the kind of discussion that we should have. But again, we need to understand it's all within the borders of a democratic discussion. Right. It's not the end of democracy. It's not tyranny. And I hope that most people will understand that as time goes by,
Well, I hope that you guys are able to be the counterbalance that you were supposed to be for these activist leftists with very high ranks in reserves or retirees, because the country needs you. We are a country that has an army and an army that has a country, and we're a people's army and not the People's Liberation Army like the Chinese, but actual. And what's happening today with these retired generals is terrible. So I'm glad that you're a retired general who's on the other side. I thank you very much for all the amazing things that you do for Israel and your organization. the ISDF.
IDSF.
IDSF. It's the Habithonistim, if
Right,
you all
in
want to
Hebrew.
know. It's
Yeah.
much
You know,
easier
we
to
tried
remember in
Habithonistim
Hebrew.
in English. It was impossible
I
for
know,
people to
I
say
know.
that.
You asked me what you should call yourselves in English. I'm like, I have no idea. I couldn't
So
figure it out.
IDSF, you know, it's similar to IDF, and it's okay.
Okay, good.
Works well.
It worked. It's
It
working.
catched- it
It's
catched
working.
well.
It's caught
Yeah.
on. All right, good.
Yeah.
All right then. So IDSF leader and our fearless Brigadier General retired Amir Avivi. Thank you very much for joining me today. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Caroline.
it.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great. And we will see you next week for another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. We'll be back again, and I hope you'll join us and make sure that everybody gets this message. Thanks so much.